The night was quiet, the sky above the small town filled with stars that shined like cold fire. The air carried the scent of pine trees and damp earth after rain. Ethan walked alone down the old trail that cut through the forest, his boots pressing softly on wet soil. He liked the silence of night when no one else came to these woods. It was his escape from a world that felt loud and heavy then. The silence broke. A streak of fire tore across the sky, burning so bright that for a moment the forest looked like daylight. Ethan stopped, his breath caught in his chest. It was not a shooting star. He had seen many of those before. This was different. This fireball moved too fast and too close, and its tail of sparks curved downward toward the trees. A thunderous boom rolled over the land, shaking the ground beneath his feet. The birds took flight all at once, their wings thrashing the air. Ethan's heart pounded harder than ever before as he turned toward the sound. Through the forest he saw smoke rise black against the stars. Curiosity and fear battled inside him. Every instinct told him to stay away, to run back to the safety of home. But something deeper pushed him forward, a need to know, a need to see. He ran toward the smoke weaving through branches and leaping over roots. His breath grew short, his legs burned, but he did not stop. The trees parted into a clearing, and there it was. Half buried in earth and stone, a strange object burned with orange light. Metal twisted and groaned like a wounded animal, steam hissing out from broken seams. It was shaped like a pod, small enough to carry one person, yet nothing like any machine Ethan had ever seen. No plane, no drone, no craft made by human hands could look like this. The pod door cracked open with a hiss. Ethan froze, his mouth dry, his body stiff. From inside, a figure moved, weak and trembling. A hand reached out, thin, pale, almost human, but not. The skin glowed faintly under the moon like silver dust. The figure fell forward, collapsing onto the dirt. Ethan's chest tightened. It was a girl. Not fully human, but not a monster either. Her eyes, large and shining, reflected the fire like mirrors. Her hair floated weightless, as if air itself tried to lift it. She breathed shallow, her body shaking with every gasp. Ethan knelt beside her, his hands hovering, unsure if he should touch. Her clothes torn and burned, strange symbols glowing faintly across the fabric. She looked at him, eyes filled with fear and pain. She tried to speak, but only broken sounds came out. Then she reached out her hand and grasped his wrist, weak but desperate. The touch sent a shock through him, not of pain but of connection. He felt her fear, felt her pleading as if words were not needed. She was asking him for something simple, something human. Help. Ethan looked around the clearing. The crash would not go unnoticed. Already in the distance he thought he heard the faint echo of engines, maybe helicopters, maybe trucks. If authorities found her, they would not treat her as a child or a survivor. They would treat her as a specimen. His thoughts raced. He had a choice. He could run, leave her here, let someone else deal with this impossible moment. Or he could take her, hide her, protect her from a world that would not understand. The girl's grip tightened even as her strength failed, her eyes locked on his. He saw not an alien, not a stranger, but someone fragile and alone, just like any lost child on Earth. Ethan swallowed hard, his heart hammering with fear and resolve. He whispered softly, though he knew she might not understand, "You are safe with me." Lifting her was harder than he expected. Her body felt light but limp. He carried her in his arms away from the smoking wreck through the trees. Every step echoed with dread. What if someone saw? What if someone followed? But still he moved forward, his mind fixed on one truth. This night, this choice would change everything. Behind them the pod hissed again, lights flickering before dying out. The forest returned to silence as smoke curled into the starry sky. And in Ethan's arms the alien girl closed her eyes. Still breathing, still alive, trusting him with her fate. The forest grew darker as Ethan moved through the shadows, carrying the alien girl in his arms. Her breath was shallow, her body light, as if bones and skin were all that held her together. Every few steps he looked back, expecting lights or voices or machines chasing him, but only the sound of his boots pressing the soil and the faint crackle of fire behind filled the night. He reached his old cabin hidden between the trees built by his grandfather long ago. No one visited this place anymore, not even his neighbors knew he still came here. It was the only safe place he could think of, and tonight it had to be enough. He pushed open the wooden door, the hinges groaning. Inside, the air smelt of dust and old wood. He laid her down gently on the couch, covering her with a blanket. Her skin felt colder than ice, yet her chest still rose and fell. She looked more fragile than human, yet strangely familiar, like someone lost, but not strange enough to fear Ethan. Lit a lantern, the soft glow washing the room in warm light. He studied her face, the curves of her features close to human, but sharper, her eyes too large, her hair faintly glowing, as if carrying hidden light. He whispered to himself, "What are you? Who are you?" She stirred her lips, moving, forming sounds broken and weak. It was not English. It was not any language he knew, yet he felt the meaning in her tone, fear, desperation, hope. Ethan shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. The crash must have been detected by satellites or radar, he was sure of it. Soon soldiers or agents or someone would arrive searching. They would look in the forest, and if they found her, they would not see a living being. They would see a chance for power and secrets. He poured water into a cup, lifted her head gently, and held it to her lips. At first she resisted, then she drank. Weakly, the water spilling on her chin. She looked at him, her eyes glimmering faintly in the lantern light. She whispered again, a broken word that sounded like please. Ethan felt something stir in his chest. He had no idea how to protect her, no idea how to even explain her if anyone saw. But he knew one thing: she was in his care now, and he could not betray the trust in her eyes outside. In the distance he heard the faint hum of engines. He blew out the lantern, instantly pressing himself to the window between the trees. Faint beams of light flickered, men searching, calling to each other. The search was already here. His hands trembled, sweat on his neck. He turned back to her. She tried to sit up, but her body gave out. He whispered, "Stay quiet. Do not move, please." She seemed to understand, her eyes wide with fear. The beams of light drew closer, voices sharp like knives. Ethan stepped outside, closing the door behind him, his mind racing. He grabbed an old shovel from the wall, pretending to dig the soil near the cabin. When the soldiers reached the clearing, one of them shouted, asking if he had seen or heard anything strange. Ethan shook his head, his voice steady, though his heart thundered. He said only that he heard thunder, maybe lightning striking somewhere in the forest. The men looked suspicious, their lights sweeping across the trees, across the cabin walls. One stepped close, peering through the window, but the girl stayed hidden beneath the blanket, holding her breath. Finally, the men moved on, their lights fading into the deeper forest. Ethan let out a long breath, his knees almost giving way. He returned inside, closing the door firmly and locking it. The girl was still there, her eyes following him, her hands trembling. He sat beside her, whispering, "They are looking for you, but I will not let them take you." She raised her hand, slowly touching his chest, her fingers pressing weakly over his heart. The gesture was clear, without words. She trusted him. Ethan stayed awake through the night, listening to distant engines fading away, and the forest slowly returning to silence. The girl slept curled beneath the blanket, breathing uneven but alive. He knew tomorrow would be harder than tonight. If the search widened, they would find the crash site, and sooner or later they would come back here. Morning came, gray and cold. The girl opened her eyes, blinking at the soft light through the window. She tried to sit up again, this time managing to stay upright, though her body shook. She pointed weakly at herself, then at the ceiling, then at the sky beyond. Ethan understood she was not from here, not from Earth. She had fallen from the stars. Her escape pod was proof enough, but now he heard it in her broken words as she tried to speak. Pieces of meaning came through. Ship destroyed, hunted, danger, alone. Ethan listened, his mind struggling to hold the impossible truth. She was not only a visitor, she was a survivor of something terrible. He asked her name, slowly pointing to himself and saying, "Ethan." She seemed to understand. She pressed her hand to her chest and spoke a soft sound, a name he could not repeat perfectly, but close enough. He nodded, repeating it clumsily. She smiled faintly for the first time, her eyes soft, with relief that he tried to understand. But peace did not last long. The distant sound of helicopters returned louder this time, shaking the cabin windows. Ethan looked at her. She looked at him, both knowing the danger was near. He had to decide whether to move her to safety deeper into the woods or stay and hope no one searched again. Every path carried risk, but doing nothing meant losing her to forces he could not trust. Clenched his fists, his heart heavy but his mind firm, he whispered, "You are not alone anymore. I will help you no matter what it costs." And in that moment, Ethan's choice became clear. He would protect her even if it meant standing against his own world. Engines thundered closer, and the ground seemed to tremble. The girl's hand found his again, her eyes wide but steady. Together they waited in silence as the shadow of danger drew near. The decision was made, and there was no turning back. That morning sun barely touched the trees when Ethan packed a bag with food, water, and old clothes. The girl sat on the couch, her hands resting on her knees, her eyes following his every move. She still looked weak, but her spirit was stronger than the night before. When he lifted the bag, she tilted her head as if asking where he pointed, toward the woods. Whispering, "Safe, we must move." She stood slowly, her legs trembling, yet she forced herself forward. Ethan reached out to steady her, and for a moment she leaned against him, her weight light like a feather. Her eyes met his, and though no words passed between them, he felt her gratitude. Together they stepped out into the forest, the cabin door shutting behind with a soft creak. The forest was alive with the calls of birds and the rustle of leaves, but beneath the beauty was danger. Every echo could be a soldier, every shadow could hide an eye. Ethan led her down narrow paths known only to him, paths his grandfather once used for hunting. Each step took them deeper away from roads and closer to safety. Or at least he hoped it was safety. After hours of walking, they stopped by a stream. The girl knelt by the water, touching it with wonder, as if it were something new. She cupped her hands, drank slowly, and smiled faintly. Ethan watched her, thinking how strange it was that someone from the stars could still find joy in simple water. He sat beside her, dipping his hands into the stream, and she copied him again. Her laughter, soft and broken, filled the air, a sound both human and not. It warmed his chest in a way he could not explain later. They sat together, eating bread and dried fruit. She struggled with the taste, frowning at the roughness of the bread, but still she tried. He pointed to the food, saying bread, then pointed to the fruit, saying apple. She repeated the sounds, clumsy yet eager. Her voice carried strange tones, but each attempt drew her closer to his world. Soon she pointed to herself again, whispering her name slowly so he could say it right. He tried again and again until her eyes lit with approval. Then she pointed to him. He said, "Ethan," and she repeated almost perfectly. The bond grew with each exchange, not through full words, but through effort, through care, through trust. Her hand brushed his as they passed the food, and she did not pull away. He realized she was no longer just a stranger hiding in his shadow. She was becoming something more, but danger never left. As the sun lowered, they heard distant dogs barking, carried by the wind. Ethan's heart froze. He knew the sound men were searching with hounds. He grabbed her hand, urging her to move. Together, they ran along the stream, bending low under branches, their feet pounding the soil. The girl struggled, her breath sharp, but she kept up, holding tightly to him. Behind them, the barking grew louder, mixed with shouts and engines. Night came, fast shadows swallowing the forest. Ethan led her into a narrow ravine, the rocks damp and cold. They hid behind a fallen tree, their backs pressed close, as lights swept across the ridge above. The beams cut through the darkness, missing them by inches. The girl trembled, her eyes wide with fear. Ethan placed a finger to his lips, whispering, "Hush." She pressed her hand against his chest again, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong. The barking past the voices faded into distance. Only then did she relax, her body sinking against his shoulder. In the silence she whispered, a word broken, but clear, "Friend." The sound struck him harder than any weapon. She had learned the word, and she had chosen to give it to Him for a moment, he forgot the soldiers, the danger, the world beyond. All that existed was the fragile warmth of trust between them. They stayed hidden until the night was deep and still. Then they moved again, climbing the ravine and slipping through thick brush. Ethan guided her toward an old cave, hidden by moss and stone. Inside, the air was cool, the walls damp, but it was shelter, and it would keep them safe for now. He spread the blanket on the floor, motioning for her to rest. She lay down, curling beneath it, her eyes heavy, but watching him until sleep took her. Ethan sat near the cave entrance, staring at the stars above. He thought of how strange life had become in only 2 nights. Yesterday, he was only a man walking the forest. Tonight, he was guardian of a life from the stars. He wondered what would happen if they caught him, if they caught her. He knew the answer, and it chilled him. They would tear her world apart piece by piece. He clenched his fists, whispering, "Not while I live." The night dragged on. At one point, the girl stirred, waking from dreams that left her shaking. She reached for him, whispering broken words of fear. Ship gone, family lost, hunted alone. Ethan knelt beside her, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. He whispered soft words of comfort, even if she did not understand. His voice seemed to calm her, and slowly she drifted back to sleep. Her hand, still gripping his sleeve, morning returned with mist covering the forest. They shared another meal of bread and apples. This time she smiled more easily, trying new words with each bite. She pointed to the cave, saying home in a questioning tone. Ethan shook his head, saying no, safe only for now. She nodded, understanding more than he expected. But before peace could settle, the ground began to tremble with distant thunder, not from the sky, but from machines heavy and relentless. Ethan's stomach dropped. He knew they had little time. He looked at her. She looked back, her eyes steady now, no longer only afraid, but ready to trust him fully. He whispered again, "You are not alone," and this time she smiled as if she believed it. The bond between them was sealed, not by words, not by promises, but by the silent vow that whatever came next, they would face it together. And as the roar of machines grew closer, Ethan felt both fear and strength. For the first time, he knew he was no longer running for himself. He was running for her, for the bond that made her more than alien, more than stranger. She was his friend. And that changed everything. The cave was quiet, but the earth shook with the sound of machines moving closer. Ethan stood near the entrance, his eyes scanning the trees, while the girl sat behind him, clutching the blanket. Her breathing was heavy, not from sickness, but from fear. She knew what he knew. They were surrounded. Soon there would be no hiding. Ethan packed the bag again, placing food and water inside. His hands steady, though his chest was tight. He whispered to her, "We must move now." She rose slowly, her body still weak, but her eyes determined. He helped her stand, guiding her through the narrow passage at the back of the cave that opened into a hidden trail. Every step mattered, every moment counted. They slipped into the thick forest, branches scratching at their arms, leaves wet with morning dew brushing their faces. Ethan kept his hand around hers, pulling her along faster than before. Behind them came the rumble of engines, the voices of men calling through radios, the sharp barking of dogs. The hunt was closing in. They ran until his lungs burned and her legs shook. Then they stopped by a fallen tree to catch breath. Ethan knew they could not outrun forever. They needed a plan. He looked at her, face pale but glowing faintly. In the shade, her eyes locked on him, waiting for his decision. In that gaze he saw trust, complete and unbroken. He whispered softly, "I will not let them take you." Sounds of pursuit grew louder, snapping twigs, breaking branches, men shouting orders. Ethan's mind raced, and then he saw an old path leading toward the cliffs above the valley. If he could lead them away, maybe she could escape. But that meant leaving her for a moment. That meant danger for both of them. He crouched in front of her, taking her hands in his. He spoke slowly, hoping she would understand. "Stay hidden, stay quiet, wait for me." Her eyes widened, fear filling them. She shook her head, holding tighter to his hands. But he gave a small smile, shaking his head. "No, it is the only way." She pressed her forehead against his chest, her voice broken, whispering, "Friend," again and again. He felt his heart crack, but he forced himself to pull away. He guided her into a hollow under the roots of a great oak tree, covering the opening with branches. Her eyes shone with tears, but she obeyed, crawling inside, curling small and silent. Ethan placed his hand against the branches, whispering, "I will come back." Then he stood, turned, and ran toward the cliffs. The forest exploded with noise behind him, men shouting, dogs barking, engines roaring. He crashed through brush, making himself loud on purpose, drawing all eyes and ears toward him. Bullets cracked through the trees, splinters flying past his face. He dove behind rocks, climbed steep slopes, his heart a wild drum in his chest. Every moment he prayed they stayed away from her hidden place at the cliffs. The ground fell into a wide valley, the river far below. Ethan stopped, chest heaving, sweat dripping down his face. Behind him soldiers closed in, their lights cutting through the trees, their voices sharp with command. He picked up stones, throwing them down the valley to create echoes as if others ran that way. The men shouted orders, some chasing the false sounds, others closing in on him. Pressed his back against the rock wall, no way out, no way down. Still he stood tall, gripping the old shovel he carried since the first night. He would not surrender, not while she lived. The men appeared, rifles raised, shouting for him to stop. Ethan shouted back, his voice raw, "You will not take her, you will not touch her." They fired, the ground bursting near his feet, forcing him back against the cliff. Then the air shifted, a glow shimmered in the forest behind them. The girl had not stayed hidden, she had followed, weak but brave. In her hand she carried a small device, glowing bright like a star. The soldiers froze, staring at the strange light. The girl staggered forward, her eyes blazing. Though her body shook, she pressed a button and the light burst outward, sending a wave that knocked the soldiers back, their weapons falling uselessly to the ground. Ethan ran to her, catching her before she collapsed, the device slipping from her hand. He held her close, whispering, Why did you follow?" She looked at him, eyes soft, filled with sorrow and courage, whispering one word together. Tears burned in his eyes as he lifted her, carrying her away while the soldiers groaned, stunned by the blast. They stumbled through the forest, heading toward the mountain caves, higher and deeper than before. The girl's head rested against his shoulder, her voice faint, whispering broken fragments of her story. Her ship destroyed, her people hunted. She was alone until him. Every word cut him deeper. Every word made him hold her tighter. He knew now this was more than survival. This was destiny. At last they reached a cavern high above the valley, hidden by stone and shadow. Inside, Ethan laid her down gently, his own body aching from wounds and exhaustion. He cleaned the cuts on her arms using water from the stream. Inside the cave, she winced but never pulled away, her trust complete. He whispered, "You saved me. You saved us." She whispered back, weak but sure, "Friend always." Outside, the night grew darker, engines moved again. Searchlights scanned the valley. They were not safe yet, but for this moment, they were alive. Ethan sat beside her, holding her hand, refusing to let go. He knew tomorrow the fight would come again, stronger and harder. But he also knew one truth as certain as the stars above. He would sacrifice anything, even his own life, to protect her. And in the silence of the cave, with danger surrounding them, Ethan realized the meaning of his choice. He was no longer just a man hiding in the woods. He was the shield between a fragile life from the stars and the world that sought to break her. That sacrifice was already made in his heart, and there was no turning back. The night inside the mountain cave was heavy with silence, broken only by the girl's weak breathing. Ethan sat awake, his back against the stone wall, his hand still holding hers. Every sound outside made his muscles tense, the distant hum of machines, the faint cries of dogs, the whirring of search drones. The hunt was not over, but time was running short. The girl stirred, her glowing eyes opening. Slowly she whispered something broken and faint. Her hands moved, tracing shapes in the air, pointing toward the small device that had saved them. Ethan picked it up, studying its faint light that now flickered weakly. She spoke again, pointing toward the sky, toward the stars above the cave ceiling. Athene understood at last. This was not a weapon, it was a beacon. A call for help, a signal to reach her people, if any of them still lived. His chest tightened. The choice stood before him. If she used the beacon, more soldiers would come searching for the source. If she did not use it, she might remain stranded alone forever. He looked at her fragile face, the way she clung to hope even through fear. He nodded slowly, whispering, "Yes, we will call them." She smiled faintly, her hand brushing his cheek. For a moment, then she pressed the device. A burst of blue light filled the cave, spilling out into the night like a star igniting. The mountains echoed with the hum, a signal reaching farther than human machines could imagine. Ethan shielded his eyes, watching as the light pulsed, then faded into the sky. It was done. Moments later, the sound of helicopters roared closer, their search intensified. Beams of white light swept across the cliffs, men shouting through radios. They had seen the signal, or at least the strange glow from the mountain. Ethan's heart pounded. He pulled the girl closer, whispering, "We must move deeper inside." But she shook her head, her eyes calm despite the danger. She whispered, "No, wait." The air trembled, the sky outside cracked with light, not from human machines, but from above, from beyond. A massive shadow appeared, cutting across the stars, a vessel unlike anything of Earth. It shimmered with silver light, its shape curved like flowing water, yet strong as mountains. The soldiers froze, their lights pointing upward, their voices breaking into panic. For the first time, the hunters were not in control. Ship descended slowly, beams of pale light sweeping the valley, searching. One beam fell on the mountain cave, blinding in its brilliance. The girl stood with Ethan's help, her body weak but her spirit unbroken. She stepped forward into the light, her glowing hair rising as if the air lifted her. Ethan held her arm steady, afraid to let go, afraid to lose her. The soldiers below opened fire, their weapons cracking the night. But the bullets vanished in the light, dissolving like ash. The ship responded with a pulse that shook the ground, sending the soldiers stumbling, dropping weapons in fear. The girl turned to Ethan, her eyes shimmering with tears. She whispered one word again, "Friend." He felt his throat close, his chest heavy. He whispered back, "Always." The beam grew stronger, lifting her slowly from his arms. He tried to hold on, his fingers clinging to hers until the light pulled her higher. For a moment, fear crushed him, the thought of never seeing her again. But then she pointed at him, her voice carried by the light strong and clear. "You are my friend, you saved me." And the ship above answered with a second beam, this one wrapping gently around Ethan. He gasped as the light lifted him too, carrying him upward beside her. The soldiers stared powerless as both human and alien rose together into the ship's embrace. The world below faded as they entered the vessel, silent and vast inside. Ethan found himself surrounded by figures like her, fragile glowing eyes, hair like silver fire. They looked at him with wonder and gratitude, whispers passing through them like wind. The girl spoke in her own language, now strong and clear, her words rolling like music. Though he did not understand, the meaning was plain. She was telling them of him, of the human who found her, who chose to protect her, who gave her hope. One of the elders stepped forward, bowing slightly before Ethan. Then in broken human words he said, "Thank you." Ethan stood stunned, his heart racing. He had no words, only a nod. The girl touched his hand again, smiling brighter than before, whispering, "Safe now, safe because of you." But the choice still remained. The ship could take him away into the stars, or return him to Earth, where the world would never understand. The elder looked at him, eyes deep as the universe itself, asking silently, "What do you choose?" Ethan looked back at the girl, her hand still in his mind filled with the memory of running, hiding, fighting. He thought of the world below, a world ready to tear her apart. And he thought of the stars above, a place where maybe trust and kindness still mattered. His decision came not with fear, but with clarity. He whispered, "I stay with her." The elder nodded as if already knowing the answer. The ship turned its course, rising higher into the night. Sky below, Earth grew smaller, the valley, the forest, the soldiers. Nothing but shadows left behind. Ahead stretched the endless stars, waiting. The girl leaned against him, her voice soft with relief, whispering, "Together He wrapped his arm around her, whispering back yes together, and for the first time since the fire streaked the sky, Ethan felt peace. The choice he made that night changed everything, not just for him, not just for her, but for two worlds. In a galaxy filled with cruelty and fear, it was not power or weapons that mattered. It was a single act of compassion. A single human choice to protect the helpless. That was what made humanity special. That was why humans could change the stars. The end.